I know thy works, and tribulation, and poverty, but thou art rich. Welcome to
the Black Excellence and Abundance Channel. Quilts, with their intricate and brightly colored patterns, are often a source of pride and admiration for their owners. But in the mid-1800s, quilts often meant the difference between enslavement and freedom, life and death for the enslaved, who knew the secret codes contained within these quilts. During the period of enslavement, a safe house along the Underground Railroad was often indicated by a quilt hanging from a clothesline or windowsill. These quilts were embedded with an escape code so that by reading the shapes and motifs sewn into the design, an enslaved person on the run could know the area's immediate dangers or even where to head next. For example, a bow tie sewn into the design of the quilt meant dress in disguise to appear of a higher status. A bear paw meant follow an animal trail through the mountains to find water and food. If the quilt had a log cabin design, that meant seek shelter now. The people here are safe to speak with. These quilts allowed men, women, and children who were fearless and courageous and who fought slavery by taking the ultimate chance, running, and trusting the message on the blanket when everything was at stake, and encouraging others to do the same. There is very little written to authenticate the existence of these quilt coding systems. However, keep in mind, these are secret codes. These quilts were literally a map to freedom. For the doubters, it is simply a refusal to believe that they can be outsmarted by these enslaved people. However, they clearly were. Many of the enslaved people at that time escaped in plain sight, right under their noses. The reality is, it's really not a stretch to think that people could communicate right in front of the oppressor. Hence, rap music. Oftentimes, the lyrics in the rap music only mean something to the people who know that language, who know the code. And in this case, it was a clear case of those who know won't tell, and those who would tell don't know. There's also evidence that the enslaved would memorize a poem that listed each of the different patterns and provided a way to recall them. One of the lines from the poem said, "The monkey wrench turns the wagon towards Canada on the Bear's Paw Trail to the crossroads." Now that definitely reminds me of the rap lyrics, because if you don't know what they're talking about, if you don't know the references, there's no way you would know the code. One quilt at a time would be displayed, and by memorizing the patterns, the enslaved could create a mental map of how to escape, all without uttering a single word. And the enslavers never caught on. It wasn't unusual for the enslaved to air their beddings on a clothesline, a fence, or a brush so that they would not be questioned. And if there was supposed to be a quilt set out but none was there, it meant it wasn't safe to go on, and the enslaved needed to hide in the woods until the quilt appeared. And the truth of the matter is, even to this day, we have a way of communicating in the presence of others who don't know our culture, and they have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. So that is really not a new phenomenon. We've been doing that for decades, for centuries even. We're now going to present some of the secret coded messages sewn into the quilts of that day. This pattern is called the monkey wrench.
This was meant that the slaves were to gather all the tools that they might need on their journey for freedom. Tools meant something with which to build shelters, compasses for determining direction, or tools to serve as weapons for defending themselves.
To the average person, this was just a beautifully designed quilt. But for the enslaved, it had a whole nother meaning.
This was known as the wagon wheel. This was the second pattern to be displayed, which signaled the slaves to pack all the things that they would go in a wagon and that would be used during their journey. This was a signal for the slaves to think about what essentials they needed to survive the trip. This next particular pattern is known as the carpenter's wheel. This pattern would have a particular significance to slaves skilled in the craft such as carpentry. Other such patterns might be an anvil, circular saw, square, or compass. It was also a symbol to steal away, a visual equivalent to the popular spiritual Steal Away, which many slaves knew and sang. The pattern told slaves to run with faith to the West-Northwest territories. This is what's known as the bear's paw. It's believed that this pattern was sometimes used to help fugitives follow the path of the bear and to identify landmarks on the edge of the plantation. This design was known as the crossroads. Once through the mountains, slaves were to travel to the crossroads. The main crossroad was Cleveland, Ohio. Any quilt hung before this one would have given directions to Ohio. This pattern was known as the log cabin. This pattern was used to let the slaves know where safe houses were. People who helped the Underground Railroad may have identified themselves as friends to slaves on the run by tracing this pattern in dirt as a signal. This quilt told slaves to look for this symbol on their journey to freedom. It was also a symbol to set up a home in a free state. This was known as the bow tie. Slaves' clothes were often tattered and easy to spot. This pattern meant that someone would bring the slave nice clothes to help them blend in with the free blacks. This pattern was known as drunkard's path. This was a clear warning for the slaves to move in a staggering fashion so as to elude any following slave hunters. It was suggested that slaves even double back to elude their pursuers.
So we pay homage to those who created the coding system that allowed thousands of people to escape slavery. There are books available on the subject. One is called Hidden in Plain Sight, and another is called Log Cabin Quilts. The Black Excellence and Abundance Channel, where Black history is every day.
Thanks for watching. We ask that you please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, thou art rich.